The flash of her Medal of Honor froze every recruit mid-stride. In the sudden silence that followed, 90 Marine recruits realized their understanding of heroism, sacrifice, and true courage had just been redefined by a woman they dismissed as nothing more than medical support. The quiet nurse who'd been handing out bandages and basic first aid supplies had just revealed herself as someone who'd earned the nation's highest military decoration for valor. From which military base are you witnessing this moment of recognition today? If this story of hidden heroes and ultimate sacrifice resonates with you, consider subscribing to discover more untold stories of America's most decorated warriors. Marine Corps Recruit Depot Parris Island sprawled across 8,000 acres of South Carolina marshland, where the United States Marine Corps had transformed civilians into Marines through a crucible of physical conditioning, mental discipline, and moral instruction that remained fundamentally unchanged since 1915. The humid coastal air carried the sound of drill instructors' voices, the rhythmic cadence of marching feet, and the occasional crack of rifle fire from distant ranges where future Marines learned to fight with precision that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Staff Sergeant Rebecca Hayes had been assigned to the medical station for Platoon 3021 during their final phase of recruit training. At 41, she moved with the careful efficiency of someone who'd spent 18 years perfecting her craft in military hospitals, field stations, and forward operating bases where medical decisions carried life and death consequences. Her graying brown hair was pulled back in regulation style, secured beneath a utility cover that showed the wear of constant use. At 5'5" and perhaps 125 pounds, she appeared exactly what her assignment suggested. A dedicated medical professional committed to keeping young recruits healthy during their transformation from civilians to Marines. The recruits of Platoon 3021 had been grinding through Marine Corps recruit training for 11 weeks. 108 had started, 90 remained. The dropouts came steadily, claimed by injury, inability, or the crushing realization that their minds and bodies couldn't meet the uncompromising standards demanded of every Marine. Those who survived lived in a constant state of controlled pressure, pushing themselves beyond previous limitations while knowing that graduation remained 1 week away. Drill Instructor Staff Sergeant Miguel Santos ran the platoon with the precision of a master craftsman and the relentless intensity of someone who understood that lives depended on his work. 12 years of active duty had taught him that Marines weren't born. They were forged through systematic application of stress, discipline, and training that revealed character while building capability. He demanded perfection not because he enjoyed watching young people struggle, but because he understood the mathematics of infantry combat, where every shortcut in training became a vulnerability in battle. Today we conduct final medical readiness inspection, Santos announced to the assembled platoon on a Friday morning that would prove unforgettable. Staff Sergeant Hayes will evaluate your first aid knowledge, check your individual medical kits, and ensure you're medically qualified for graduation. He gestured toward Hayes, who stood at attention beside tables loaded with medical supplies and evaluation materials. This is not optional. Every Marine must be capable of providing basic medical care under combat conditions. The recruits formed orderly ranks facing the medical station, their faces displaying the mixture of confidence and anxiety that came with any evaluation so close to graduation. Most had mastered the basic medical procedures required of all Marines, but they understood that Staff Sergeant Hayes would be testing their knowledge with the thoroughness that characterized every aspect of Marine Corps training. Hayes stepped forward with professional competence, her voice carrying clearly across the formation. Good morning, recruits. Today's evaluation covers trauma assessment, hemorrhage control, casualty evacuation, and field treatment procedures. You'll demonstrate your knowledge individually while explaining each step to ensure comprehension. Recruit Marcus Thompson, a 20-year-old from Detroit who'd joined the Marines to follow his father's military legacy, raised his hand with a question. Staff Sergeant, will this evaluation affect our graduation eligibility? Every evaluation affects your graduation eligibility, Hayes replied with the dry precision that characterized most military medical personnel. Marine Corps standards don't have exceptions for convenience. For the next 3 hours, Hayes conducted individual evaluations with methodical thoroughness that revealed extensive experience in both teaching and field medicine. She corrected techniques with precise explanations, demonstrated advanced procedures when recruits showed confusion, and maintained standards that reflected deep understanding of what Marines would face in actual combat situations. Most recruits performed adequately, displaying competence that satisfied graduation requirements even if it fell short of excellence. A few demonstrated the kind of natural aptitude that suggested potential for advanced medical training. Hayes made notes on each performance, her assessments reflecting years of evaluating personnel under various conditions. During a brief break in evaluations, recruit Jennifer Park approached the medical station with obvious curiosity about the supplies and equipment Hayes had arranged for the day's testing. Park had consistently demonstrated academic excellence throughout training, maintaining the highest scores in her class, while showing genuine interest in subjects that extended beyond basic military requirements. Staff Sergeant, Park said respectfully, "Some of this equipment looks more advanced than what we learned in basic medical training." Hayes glanced at the supplies Park was examining, noting the recruit's observation of details that others had missed. Marines sometimes encounter situations that require more than basic procedures, she explained. Medical personnel maintain equipment for various contingencies. Park's attention was drawn to a particular piece of equipment that seemed inconsistent with routine first aid supplies. "Is that a surgical airway kit?" she asked, displaying knowledge that went beyond standard recruit medical training. "Where did you learn to recognize surgical equipment?" Hayes asked, her tone sharpening with professional interest. "My mother was a trauma nurse," Park explained. "I grew up around medical equipment and terminology." Hayes studied the young recruit with renewed attention, recognizing intelligence and background knowledge that could prove valuable in advanced training scenarios. "What made you choose Marines instead of medical school?" "I wanted to serve first," Park replied simply. "Medicine can wait. Marines can't." The conversation was interrupted by Santos calling the platoon back to formation for the afternoon evaluation segment. Hayes had arranged practical scenarios designed to test recruit ability to apply medical procedures under stress, with time pressure and environmental complications designed to simulate combat conditions. As the evaluation resumed, the morning's coastal breeze had intensified, causing Hayes's uniform blouse to flutter occasionally. During one such moment, as she knelt beside a simulated casualty to demonstrate proper assessment techniques, her uniform shifted enough to reveal something that several recruits glimpsed but didn't immediately process. Recruit David Martinez was the first to realize what he'd seen. A flash of distinctive blue ribbon with 13 white stars, barely visible beneath Hayes's uniform blouse, but unmistakable to anyone familiar with military decorations. His sharp intake of breath caught the attention of nearby recruits, who followed his gaze toward their medical instructor. The Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration for valor in combat. Martinez's recognition spread through the formation like electricity, passed by glances, whispers, and the kind of instantaneous communication that occurs among groups under shared stress. Within moments, 90 recruits had become aware that their medical instructor wore decoration that represented the absolute pinnacle of military heroism. The evaluation continued, but everything had changed. Recruits who'd been going through routine motions now watched Hayes with intense fascination, trying to reconcile the quiet medical professional with someone who'd earned recognition reserved for the most extraordinary acts of courage under fire. Hayes seemed unaware of her medal's revelation, continuing the evaluation with the same methodical competence she'd shown throughout the day. But observant recruits began noticing details they'd missed before. The way she moved with unconscious tactical awareness, automatically positioning herself with sight lines to exits and potential threats. The precision of her medical demonstrations that went beyond textbook knowledge to practical expertise earned under conditions they couldn't imagine. When the evaluation concluded, Santos dismissed the platoon for evening chow, but several recruits lingered near the medical station with obvious curiosity about their instructor's background. Park approached Hayes hesitantly, her usual confidence tempered by newfound respect. "Staff Sergeant," she began carefully. "Some of the recruits noticed, that is, we saw." "My medal," Hayes finished quietly, her expression revealing resignation rather than pride. Yes, Staff Sergeant. The Medal of Honor. Hayes continued packing medical supplies with practiced efficiency, her movements suggesting someone accustomed to rapid deployment and extraction. Recruits see many things during training, she said diplomatically. Not all observations require discussion. Martinez stepped forward, his voice filled with genuine awe. Staff Sergeant, what did you do? I mean, what action earned? He trailed off, suddenly aware that he might be asking for information that couldn't be shared. Hayes paused in her equipment organization, clearly weighing her response. When she spoke, her voice carried weight that commanded absolute attention from every recruit present. Afghanistan. Forward Operating Base Chapman. March 2019, she said simply, as if those basic facts explained everything. Park felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to align in her memory. Chapman, wasn't that where a field hospital came under direct attack, Hayes confirmed. Multiple casualties, compromised evacuation routes, and enemy forces overrunning defensive positions. The recruits exchanged glances, understanding that they were about to hear details of combat action that had earned the nation's highest recognition for valor. The base was being evacuated due to intelligence indicating imminent large-scale attack. Hayes continued, her voice taking on the clinical tone of someone reciting facts rather than reliving experiences. I was supervising medical evacuation of wounded personnel when enemy forces breached the perimeter earlier than expected. Santos had returned to check on his recruits, arriving in time to overhear Hayes's account. He positioned himself where he could observe both the medical instructor and his recruits, recognizing that they were about to receive education that went far beyond their normal training curriculum. How many casualties were you treating? Park asked quietly. 17 wounded requiring immediate evacuation, Hayes replied. 3 critical, 8 urgent, 6 routine. Standard triage protocols called for evacuating critical cases first, but enemy fire had compromised our primary landing zone. Martinez was struggling to process the tactical situation Hayes was describing. What happened to the evacuation? Hayes's expression flickered with something that might have been remembered pain. First medevac helicopter took fire during approach. Pilot was killed, co-pilot wounded. Aircraft went down approximately 200 meters from our position. Were there survivors? Thompson asked. For crew members, 3 wounded. They became additional casualties requiring protection and treatment while enemy forces advanced on our position. The recruits were beginning to understand the complexity of the situation that had led to Hayes's medal. A medical professional faced with multiple casualty loads, compromised evacuation routes, advancing enemy forces, and the additional burden of protecting survivors from a downed aircraft. What did you do? Park asked, though something in her expression suggested she already understood that the answer would defy normal expectations. Hayes shouldered her medical bag, the movement revealing conditioning that her uniform had concealed. I established a defensive perimeter around the casualties, coordinated their medical treatment, and maintained their protection until relief forces could reach our position. Santos understood military terminology well enough to recognize that Hayes was describing action far beyond normal medical support. Staff Sergeant, he said carefully, medical personnel don't typically establish defensive perimeters. Hayes's smile held no humor. Medical personnel do whatever is necessary to protect their patients, drill instructor Santos. For how long? Martinez pressed. 6 hours, 43 minutes. Hayes replied with precision that spoke of time counted under extreme stress. Enemy contact was continuous for the first 3 hours, intermittent afterward. Thompson was trying to reconcile Hayes's slight build with combat action against enemy forces. You held off enemy attacks for 6 hours? By yourself? With assistance from wounded personnel who could still fight, Hayes clarified. Marines don't stop being Marines because they're casualties. The implications of her statement were staggering. Hayes had essentially commanded an improvised combat unit consisting of wounded Marines and helicopter crew members, maintaining defensive action while providing medical treatment under enemy fire for nearly 7 hours. How many enemy forces? Santos asked, his voice carrying professional interest that went beyond casual curiosity. Initial estimates suggested company strength, Hayes replied. Later intelligence indicated reinforced platoon, approximately 60 combatants. Park felt her understanding of courage and capability being completely redefined. 60 enemy soldiers against wounded Marines and a medical officer? Against Marines, Hayes corrected firmly. Wounded Marines are still Marines. Medical Marines are still Marines. The enemy made the mistake of assuming otherwise. Santos was beginning to understand why Hayes had been assigned to his platoon during recruit training. Someone with her combat record didn't end up at Parris Island by accident. Staff Sergeant, he said respectfully. How did you end up here? Training recruits instead of what? Hayes asked. Leading combat units? Commanding field hospitals? Training special operations medics? Her questions carried implications that suggested career possibilities beyond what any of them had imagined for medical personnel. I requested assignment to recruit training, Hayes continued. After 18 years of combat deployments, field hospitals, and forward operating bases, I wanted to help build the next generation of Marines. Martinez was struggling to process the idea that someone with Hayes's evident capabilities would choose to work with new recruits. But you could probably have any assignment you wanted. Hayes studied the young recruit with expression that mixed understanding with gentle correction. I have exactly the assignment I want, recruit. There's no more important mission than helping civilians become Marines. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a black sedan that pulled up near the medical station. 2 men in civilian clothing emerged, moving with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents or high-level military officials. The lead man, wearing a suit that managed to look both expensive and practical, approached Hayes with obvious familiarity. Staff Sergeant Hayes, he said formally. Colonel Morrison sends his compliments and requests your immediate assistance. Hayes sighed deeply, the sound of someone who'd been expecting this moment. Agent Richardson, she replied, demonstrating previous acquaintance. I thought I had until graduation. Circumstances have accelerated the timeline, Richardson explained. Your expertise is required for a developing situation. Santos watched the exchange with growing understanding. Hayes wasn't just assigned to recruit training. She was being held in reserve for missions that required her specific combination of medical expertise and combat experience. What kind of situation? Hayes asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer wouldn't be shared in front of unauthorized personnel. The classified kind that requires someone with your particular qualifications, Richardson replied diplomatically. Hayes began collecting equipment that had been arranged for the day's evaluation, but her movements now revealed items that seemed inconsistent with routine medical training. Advanced trauma supplies, specialized communication equipment, and personal gear that looked more appropriate for field deployment than base assignment. My gear, she asked Richardson. Already loaded in the vehicle. Park stared in amazement as Hayes was revealed as someone who'd been prepared for immediate deployment despite her assignment to recruit training. Her months at Parris Island hadn't been standard duty so much as temporary cover between more significant missions. Medical gear for what kind of operations? Santos asked. Richardson answered while Hayes completed her preparations. Let's just say that certain international situations require medical personnel with very specific qualifications. Staff Sergeant Hayes' services are needed elsewhere. Hayes shouldered equipment bags that had been waiting in Richardson's vehicle, her movements revealing physical conditioning that her medical duties had disguised. Drill Instructor Santos, she said, offering her hand with formal respect. Your recruits show exceptional potential. They'll make outstanding Marines. Wait, Santos said, processing rapid calculations about Hayes' true role at Parris Island. You weren't just assigned here for routine medical support. You were evaluating them. Hayes' smile held genuine warmth for the first time since her medal had been revealed. Some of them show qualities that suggest potential beyond standard infantry assignments. Park in particular demonstrates intelligence and character that could serve specialized units. You've been talent scouting, Santos realized. For what kind of missions? The kind that require people who can think, adapt, and maintain operational effectiveness when conventional support isn't available, Hayes replied cryptically. Richardson was growing impatient with the extended farewell. We need to move, he announced. As Hayes walked toward the waiting vehicle, Park called after her. Staff Sergeant, what should we remember about today? Hayes paused, considering the question carefully. Remember that heroes don't always look heroic, she said finally. That the most important battles are often fought by people you'd never expect, and that every Marine, regardless of specialty, is capable of extraordinary things when circumstances demand it. The federal agents escorted Hayes toward the sedan, where additional personnel waited with equipment and communication gear that spoke of immediate deployment to locations far from South Carolina. As the vehicle pulled away, Santos found himself staring after the woman who'd spent months disguised as routine medical support, while apparently evaluating his recruits for missions he couldn't imagine. The recruits would have questions, he knew. 90 young Marines who discovered that their assumptions about heroism, capability, and military service had been fundamentally challenged by someone they'd initially dismissed as peripheral support. Park approached Santos hesitantly, her mind clearly working through implications that extended far beyond normal recruit training. "Drill instructor," she said quietly. "That wasn't normal assignment, was it? Her being here." Santos looked at the intelligent recruit who'd been first to engage Hayes in meaningful conversation about medical procedures. "No, recruit. I don't think anything about Staff Sergeant Hayes was normal. She was testing us," Park continued. "All of us. Not just medical knowledge, but character, potential, suitability for something." "What makes you think that?" "The way she watched us during training," Park explained. "Not like medical personnel evaluating basic competence. Like someone identifying candidates for advanced selection." Santos nodded slowly, confirming what Park had intuited. "And what do you think her assessment was?" Park was quiet for a moment, processing possibilities that suggested futures far beyond standard Marine Corps assignments. "I think some of us might get opportunities we weren't expecting," she said finally. As they stood watching the dust settle from Hayes' departure, Santos wondered which of his recruits might receive visitors in the months ahead. Medal of Honor recipients didn't evaluate personnel for routine assignments. They identified candidates for missions that required the kind of courage Hayes had demonstrated at FOB Chapman. The medical supplies Hayes had abandoned during her evaluation lay arranged on tables around the training area, ordinary equipment that had been used by someone whose courage had been tested under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Tomorrow would bring a replacement medical instructor, someone ordinary who was exactly what they appeared to be. Someone whose heroism existed in potential rather than in documented action under enemy fire. But the 90 recruits of Platoon 3021 would never again assume that medical personnel were non-combatants, or that quiet competence indicated limited capability. They'd learned that the greatest heroes were often those who served without recognition, and that extraordinary courage sometimes wore the uniform of ordinary duty. The lesson would serve them well in future assignments, where the difference between mission success and failure often depended on recognizing capability in unexpected places. In a world where true warriors sometimes disguised themselves as support personnel, Staff Sergeant Rebecca Hayes had given them the most valuable education they would ever receive about courage, sacrifice, and the reality of heroism. They just didn't know it yet. Martinez stood at the spot where he'd first glimpsed Hayes' Medal of Honor, his hand unconsciously moving to his own chest, where someday he might wear decorations earned through service and sacrifice. "Drill instructor," he said quietly. "I understand something now that I didn't before." "What's that, recruit?" Martinez looked toward the road where Hayes' sedan had disappeared, carrying someone who'd spent months hiding recognition that represented the pinnacle of military valor. "Heroes don't always look like heroes," he said finally. "And the most important people are usually the ones who don't need to prove how important they are." Santos smiled, recognizing that Martinez had learned something far more valuable than any medical procedure Hayes could have taught him. In the distance, dust clouds marked the departure of someone who'd spent months pretending to be ordinary medical support, while apparently evaluating recruits for missions that required more than standard Marine Corps training. The flash of her Medal of Honor had indeed frozen every recruit mid-stride. But the lesson that followed would last their entire military careers.